Welcome to LRS Techlogics. My name is Avi. Today we are going to discuss about what is namespace, what is constructors, and different types of constructors. Okay. Our first question is what is namespace? Namespace is a logical container which consists of namespaces, classes, interfaces, structures, and delegates, and etc. It's just a block of code. Namespace will not have any memory. However, namespaces are mandatory in C# to organize the code because uh, it is a block of code. It is just segregates the code into different blocks. Like in our computer, we will have a folders. Why we will have a folders? It's just a container uh, to store some files in that container, right? Namespace also like that. It is just a container to consist of and the namespaces or classes or interfaces or some other values. Using keyword is used to import the namespaces. So one in a project we can import the namespaces. By importing the namespaces, we can consume the classes which are present in the namespace. Okay. Use to import a namespace in a project, we use using keyword. Okay, system namespace is the master or default namespace in .NET. So all the default classes and members will be present in the system namespace. So when you start a project, you will see that using system, that is the default or a master namespace in the .NET. Okay. Our next question is what is constructor? Actually, constructors are plays a very important role in the .NET programming, C# programming. Okay, then let us discuss about what is constructor. A constructor is a special method. Okay, which means constructor is also a method, but it is a special method, which means it will have a some special characteristics. Okay, and it is responsible to initialize the variables of that class. Constructor is the responsible to initialize the variable of that class. Okay, it will not have any return type because usually methods will have a return types, but this is a special method, that method, right? That's why this will not have any return type. Okay, constructor of a class must have the same name as the class name in which it was present, which means if I define a class called class 1, okay, the constructor name also should be class 1. Okay, that's why this is called as constructor. Constructor will have the same name as class. Okay, should be. Every class requires constructor. If we don't want to create a if we want to create the object of a class, and it is automatically called when the object or instance of class is created. Means every class requires constructor if we want to create the object of a class. Okay, constructor is required because if we want to create a object of a class, constructor is required because it is the first one called when we create the object of a class. Okay, and it is automatically called when an object or an instance of a class is created. Okay, a class can have any number of constructors, so we can have a n number of constructors. How? Using overloaded methods, we can have a different kind of constructor. What is overloading, that we'll discuss in a later session. Okay, if we don't implement a constructor, there will be default constructor present by the compiler. Let's suppose if I have not created a constructor, okay, and created an object of a class. Okay, when we don't explicitly create a constructor, there will be a default constructor which will be created by the compiler when the object is created. Okay, when the object is created. That's why constructor requires a every object requires a constructor. Okay, let's discuss about types of constructors. Okay, how many types we have? There are one, two, three, and four. There are four types of constructor we have. What is that? One is default or parameterless constructor, and second one is parameterized constructor, and third one is copy constructor, and fourth one is static constructor. Okay, first let's discuss about default or parameterless constructor. As I said in the earlier, so when when we don't create a constructor explicitly, there will be a constructor which is created by the compiler when the object is created. That is called as default or parameterless constructor, because we have not explicitly created the constructor. When compiler creates a constructor, it will be a parameterless, because we don't pass any parameter to that constructor. That's why it is called as default or parameterless constructor. If a constructor method doesn't take any parameters, we will call it as a default or parameterless construction. These constructors can be created by programmer, or implicit constructor will be created by the compiler. Parameterized constructor. What is parameterized constructor? When the constructor takes the parameter, then it is called as parametric constructor. Which means when constructor takes a parameter, that should be created by the programmer, which means it is the explicit constructor. Okay, if a constructor takes parameter, called as parameter constructor. If constructor takes a parameter, which means it is defined by the program, which is also called as explicit constructor. Okay, copy constructor. What is copy constructor? Copy constructor means uh, taking a instance of a class as a parameter, that is called as copy constructor. Which means it is also parameter constructor, parameterized constructor, but it takes object as a parameter, that is called copy constructor. Okay, in parameterized constructor, every time we can pass different values. Okay, first time we can pass 10, and second time 20, second third time 30. Like that we can pass different values for the parameterized constructor. When it comes to copy constructor, here we are passing object as a parameter, which means the first object of a constructor will be called sent as a parameter here. That means first and second objects will be having same reference, that means same value. Okay, if you want to create multiple instances with same values, okay, because every time I am passing the object as a parameter, that means the value will be the same values. Then we use these copy constructors. In a copy constructor, the constructor is the same class as a parameter. As I said, parameter will be taken as a class. Okay, this is a class like copycon, and int x is a variable, and copycon initial int I. This is a constructor, explicit constructor. Okay, and this is another constructor with class name as a parameter. Okay, when it comes to wide menu, here I have created an instance of of the class, and pass 10 as a parameter, and cd1 display. When I create a second instance of a class, I'm passing cd1, which means the class as a parameter here. This means it will call here this method will be executed, and it will pass the values. What it will pass the same as this value 10 will be passed here. Okay, the fourth one is static constructor. If a constructor is explicitly declared by using static keyword, called as static constructor. If a constructor is explicitly declared by using static keyword called a static constructor. Okay, if a class contains static variables, then only implicitly static construction will be present. Otherwise, we need to define them explicitly. Static construction will be created when there are any static fields available under that class. Then only static implicit constructors will be present. Otherwise, programmers need to create a explicit static constructors whenever there is a need. Okay, static constructors are responsible in initializing static variables only. Okay, these constructions are never called explicitly because for the static methods we don't create an object. We can directly call them. That's why we cannot, we never call them as a explicitly. However, for the non-static methods, we should explicitly call. How? By creating a instance of the non-static method, we create the static constructor, non-static constructor. But for the static constructor, we don't to create any instance of that static class. That's why we no need to call them as a explicitly. There are implicitly called. Okay, these constructors are first to execute under my class. When there is a static constructor, it will directly execute under that particular static class because we never explicitly call, right? So it is the first block of code to execute in the under static class. Okay, static constructors are cannot be parameterized, so method overloading cannot be possible. We just discussed it in the static constructors that constructors can be parameterized, and it can be overloaded, but static constructors cannot be parameterized because these are explicitly created and it will call whenever the class starts. It is the first block because when it is the first block, from where I can pass the parameter? I cannot, right? But for non-static classes, non-static constructors, I can pass a parameter because I'm explicitly calling the constructor by creating an instance of a class. That's why there we can pass a parameter, and when we can pass a parameter to the constructor or a method, that method or a constructor can be overloaded. We will discuss about overload in the future session. For now, let's discuss about when a method or a constructor can takes a parameter that can be overloaded. Okay, here static constructors cannot be parameterized, so method overloading cannot be possible. Okay, okay. What is the use of constructors? Implicit constructors are will initialize the same values for every instance. Okay, as there are parameterless constructors. Okay, if we create constructor with the parameter, we can initialize the values as we want for every instance. Okay, what is the use of constructor? As we discussed, the constructor will initialize the variables. Okay, when it is initialize the variables, it will initialize with the default values when we don't provide any value. Okay, if we provide value, it will initialize with that value for every instance. Okay, if I define x is equal to 10, whenever I created a class, it just initializes x as 10 for every instance of that class. Okay, but I don't want that in some situations. Okay, in that situation, I can create a parameter. Okay, as a parameter, I can create a constructor. Okay, to that parameter I can pass the value whatever I want. Okay, that is why we need constructor. This will help us the programmer to initialize the variables and to move forward with the our programming. That's why we need that. Okay, what is the difference between static and non-static concept, or else static versus non-static constructors. Okay, static constructor. If a constructor is explicitly declared by using a static keyword called as static constructor. Okay, if a constructor explicitly declared by using a static keyword called as static constructor. Rest of all are non-static constructors or constructors which doesn't have a static keyword are called as non-static constructors. Okay, second point. Static fields are initialized by the static constructors. Non-static fields are initialized by non-static constructors. Because static keyword is there, right? That's why static fields will be initialized by static. It is responsible of static constructor. Initializing non-static fields, initializing responsible is non-static constructor. Okay. Third point. Static constructors are implicitly called, there is no chance to call explicitly. This we already discussed in the we already discussed this. Static consider first block of a code to execute, that's why it is implicitly called, there is no chance to call explicitly. Okay, non-static constructors are explicitly called, which means by creating an instance of a class, constructor will be called. Fourth point. Static constructors execute one time immediately when static class start execute. It is the first block of code to execute under a class, because whenever there is a static class is started, then we can static construct will be executed, and it is the first block of code. Non-static constructors will execute when there is an instance of a class created. For each instance of a class, it will create a non-static constructor. It will be called as a non-static constructor. Because for static constructors, static classes, we don't create any instance to call it, right? It will be directly called. But for non-static classes, we need to create a class, we need to create an instance. So whenever there is an instance created, the constructor will be called. If you create n number of instances, n number of times the constructor will be called, but static constructor will be called only one time. Next point. In a life cycle of a class, static constructors are called only one time. Okay, non-static constructors called zero times when there is no instance, and called each and every instance when there is a instance created. Okay, in a life cycle of class, static constructor will be called only one time. However, when non-static constructor will be called zero times when there is no instance, because whenever there is an instance, then only non-static constructor will be called, right? So when there is no instance, non-static constructor will not be called, called, but it will call whenever there is an instance created. Next point is static constructor. This is parameterless constructor, because static constructor, it is the first block. If it is a first block, we cannot pass a parameter. That's why this is a parameterless constructor. Non-static constructors can be parameters, because we call them as explicitly and we can pass any parameter to that constructor. Static constructor cannot be overloaded, because when there is a parameter, then only we can overload the constructor or a method. This is a parameterless constructor, that's why this will not be overloaded. Non-static constructor can be overloaded because this is a parameterized constructor, so that's why we can overload the constructor. That's it for today. Thank you for watching my videos. Please subscribe for more videos. Have a great day.